April 17th, 1945. The coastal waters near Mar del Plata, Argentina, shimmered under the autumn sun as fishing vessel Doña Maria bobbed gently on the South Atlantic swells. Captain Eduardo Vasquez squinted at the horizon, confident that the war raging thousands of miles away would never touch these peaceful shores. He could not have known that within hours the dying gasp of the Third Reich would arrive on his doorstep, carrying secrets that would remain buried for decades. Before we dive into this story, drop a quick hi in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. This is the story of how a single German submarine's mysterious appearance would spark one of the most enduring enigmas of World War II, forever changing how we understand the final, desperate acts of a collapsing regime. The warm breeze carried salt spray across the deck of the Doña Maria as Captain Vasquez directed his crew of 5 to haul in the morning's catch. At 52, Vasquez had spent more than 30 years at sea. His weathered face and calloused hands told the story of a man who understood the ocean's moods and respected its power. Though news of the war dominated radio broadcasts and newspaper headlines, Argentina's official neutrality had largely insulated its citizens from the conflict that had engulfed much of the world. "Weather's turning," remarked Miguel Suarez, the vessel's first mate, gesturing toward dark clouds gathering on the eastern horizon. "Perhaps we should head back early." "Not yet," replied Vasquez, studying his watch. "We've got time for one more haul. The restaurants in Mar del Plata will pay double for fresh corvina today." As the crew prepared to cast their nets again, 17-year-old lookout Tomas Mendoza called out from his perch near the bow. "Captain, something in the water, 3 points off starboard." Vasquez raised his binoculars and focused on the disturbance. At first, he thought it might be a whale, but as the shape broke the surface more fully, a cold realization washed over him. Rising from the depths was the unmistakable conning tower of a submarine, a German U-boat, its deck gun clearly visible as water cascaded off its sleek, black hull. "Santa Maria," whispered Suarez, crossing himself. "What is it doing here?" Captain Vasquez had no answer. The vessel was approximately 2 kilometers away, but even at that distance, its presence was imposing, a predator that had somehow strayed far from its hunting grounds in the North Atlantic. The distinctive insignia of the Kriegsmarine was clearly visible on the conning tower, alongside a numeric designation that Vasquez couldn't quite make out. "Turn us around," ordered Vasquez, his voice steady despite his racing heart. "We're heading back to port." "Shouldn't we report this?" asked Suarez. "To whom? The navy that looks the other way? The government that trades with both sides?" Vasquez shook his head. "We saw nothing today." But as the Doña Maria began its turn toward shore, the submarine's diesel engines roared to life, and the vessel began moving parallel to the fishing boat's course. Through his binoculars, Vasquez could now see figures on the U-boat's deck. Perhaps a dozen men, one of whom raised his arm in what appeared to be a greeting or signal. "They want us to stop," said Suarez, his voice tight with fear. "We cannot outrun them," replied Vasquez grimly, ordering the engines cut. "Let's hope they only want information." As the fishing vessel drifted to a halt, the U-boat closed the distance between them with surprising speed. Now, Vasquez could clearly see its designation, U-977. The submarine circled once around the Doña Maria before coming alongside, barely 30 meters away. A German officer standing on the conning tower raised a megaphone to his lips. "Argentinian vessel," he called out in accented Spanish. "We require assistance. We come in peace." Across the Atlantic, in the crumbling heart of the Third Reich, Korvettenkapitän Werner Müller stood rigidly at attention in the damp underground bunker that now served as the headquarters of the German Navy. At 43, Müller had served the Kriegsmarine with distinction since 1925, rising through the ranks to command one of Germany's deadly Type 7C U-boats. For 3 years, he had stalked Allied shipping in the North Atlantic, sending 27 vessels to the ocean floor before mechanical failures and increasingly effective Allied countermeasures had forced his return to Berlin in late 1944. Fleet Admiral Karl Dönitz paced before a large map table, his face haggard from lack of sleep. The room smelled of cigarette smoke, sweat, and desperation. Soviet forces were less than 50 kilometers from Berlin. American and British troops had crossed the Rhine, and the Luftwaffe had been all but destroyed. Germany was dying, yet its leaders continued to plot as if victory remained possible. "Gentlemen," began Dönitz, addressing the 5 naval officers assembled before him, "what I am about to share cannot leave this room. The Führer has approved Operation Siegfried, our insurance policy for the continuation of the Reich beyond its current territorial boundaries." Müller exchanged glances with Kapitän Lieutenant Heinrich Schäfer, his former academy classmate. Both men had seen enough to know that Germany's defeat was inevitable, but neither dared voice such thoughts. Dönitz continued, his voice dropping to just above a whisper. "Selected U-boats will transport critical personnel and materials to secure locations overseas. You 5 have been chosen to command these missions due to your exemplary service records and absolute loyalty." The Admiral unrolled a detailed chart of the South Atlantic. "Korvettenkapitän Müller, you will command U-977 on the most sensitive mission of all. Your cargo will include documents, scientific data, and certain artifacts of immeasurable value to the future of our cause." Müller stepped forward. "With respect, Admiral, what exactly am I transporting?" Dönitz's eyes hardened. "You will be briefed on the specifics prior to departure. All you need to know now is that failure is not an option. The materials you carry represent years of scientific advancement that cannot fall into enemy hands." Kapitän Lieutenant Schäfer cleared his throat. "Sir, Allied air and naval supremacy makes any Atlantic crossing extremely dangerous. What are our chances of success?" "The Reich has existed for 12 years, replied Dönitz coldly. "But our ideology will survive for 1,000, provided men like you fulfill your duties. You sail in 3 days. Heil Hitler." As the officers filed out of the briefing room, Müller caught up with Schäfer in the narrow corridor. "Heinrich, this is madness. Berlin will fall within weeks." Schäfer glanced nervously at the guards stationed nearby. "Watch your words, Werner. The walls have ears." "I've lost 38 men under my command," continued Müller in a lower voice. "I won't sacrifice more for a lost cause." "Then you'll face the firing squad," replied Schäfer matter-of-factly. "Better to die at sea with honor than against a wall as a traitor." Later that evening, Müller sat alone in his sparse quarters, a glass of schnapps in hand, staring at a photograph of his wife Elsa and their 2 children. They had been killed in an Allied bombing raid on Hamburg in 1943. With them gone and Germany facing certain defeat, Müller had little left to lose, yet something about Dönitz's mission troubled him deeply. What cargo could be so valuable that the crumbling Reich would risk one of its few remaining submarines to transport it halfway around the world? The answer came the following morning, when Müller was escorted to a nondescript warehouse on the outskirts of Berlin. SS Standartenführer Klaus Hoffmann, a tall, thin man with cold eyes, met him at the entrance. Without introduction, Hoffmann led Müller through a series of security checkpoints into a large, central chamber filled with crates of varying sizes. "These," announced Hoffmann with evident pride, "are the seeds of the Fourth Reich." Müller surveyed the scene with growing unease. Dozens of workers in lab coats were carefully packing items into specialized containers. Some appeared to be document cases, others contained scientific equipment, and still others were being handled with extreme caution by workers wearing protective gear. "What exactly am I transporting, Standartenführer?" asked Müller. "The future," replied Hoffmann cryptically. Research data from our advanced weapons programs, financial instruments and cultural treasures that will fund and inspire our resurgence. You needn't concern yourself with the specifics. Miller's eyes narrowed. As the captain responsible for delivering this cargo, I need to know its nature to ensure proper handling. Hoffman considered this for a moment before nodding. Very well. Follow me. In a smaller room adjacent to the main warehouse, Hoffman unlocked a steel cabinet and removed a leather-bound ledger. This manifest details everything you'll be carrying. Study it, but it stays here. As Muller flipped through the pages, his professional composure faltered. The manifest listed gold bullion, bearer bonds, and currency, expected items for funding a government in exile. But it also included research files from projects with codenames like D. Glock and Laternenträger, technical specifications for weapon systems that Müller had never heard of, and most disturbingly, biological specimens labeled only as anthropological samples and medical research data. This last section, said Müller, pointing to an entry marked Ahnenerbe Materials. What does it contain? The heritage of our ancestors, replied Hoffman, his expression unreadable. Ancient artifacts that prove the superiority of Aryan civilization. They must be preserved. Müller closed the ledger, his decision made. He would command this mission as ordered, but not for the reasons his superiors believed. Some of this cargo, particularly the medical research, carried the stain of atrocities he had heard whispered about but never confirmed. It should never reach those who would use it to continue the Reich's darkest work. 3 days later, under cover of darkness, U-977 slipped its moorings at the Baltic port of Kiel. With a crew of 48 men, all volunteers, all sworn to secrecy, the submarine began its dangerous journey. The boat's storage compartments had been modified to accommodate the special cargo, reducing the torpedo complement to just 4 and limiting provisions for the crew. If they encountered Allied warships, they would have little means to defend themselves. As U-977 submerged for its initial passage through the heavily patrolled North Sea, Müller gathered his senior officers in the cramped wardroom. First Officer Otto Weber, Chief Engineer Franz Lehmann, and Navigation Officer Jürgen Klein listened intently as their captain outlined their mission parameters. Our official orders are to transport these materials to Argentina, where German expatriates will receive them, explained Müller. We are to avoid all contact with enemy vessels and maintain radio silence except in dire emergency. And our unofficial orders, Herr Kapitän? Asked Weber. Always perceptive, Müller hesitated. There are none, but I believe we carry a burden that requires careful consideration. Some of this cargo represents the worst aspects of what our nation has become. When we reach Argentina, we will need to make difficult decisions. Klein, the youngest of the officers at just 26, frowned. Sir, are you suggesting we might not comply fully with our orders? I'm suggesting that we are German naval officers first, Nazis second, replied Müller firmly. We will complete our mission, but we will also do what is right. The war is lost. Surely you all recognize this. What matters now is what kind of men we choose to be in defeat. The officers exchanged uncomfortable glances. Such talk bordered on treason, yet none could deny the truth of their captain's words. The crew must not know the nature of our cargo, continued Müller. As far as they're concerned, we're transporting technical documents and financial assets to secure German interests abroad. Nothing more. As U-977 navigated through the minefields and patrol zones of the North Sea, the submarine maintained a cautious depth of 200 meters, moving primarily at night when surfaced. The journey would take them west around the British Isles, then south along the African coast, before crossing the Atlantic to Argentina. A voyage of over 11,000 kilometers that would test both the vessel's mechanical reliability and the crew's endurance. 2 weeks into the journey, as U-977 passed the Azores, Radio man Dieter Schmidt intercepted a transmission that changed everything. Adolf Hitler was dead, reportedly by suicide in his Berlin bunker. Germany's unconditional surrender appeared imminent. When Schmidt brought the news to the captain's quarters, Müller ordered it kept from the crew temporarily. He needed time to consider what this meant for their mission. With Hitler gone and Germany defeated, what purpose remained in delivering cargo that might one day fuel a resurgence of Nazi ideology? That night, Müller invited his senior officers to his quarters and shared the news. "Gentlemen, with the Führer dead and Berlin fallen, we face a critical decision. Technically, we should continue our mission as ordered, but those orders came from a government that no longer exists." Chief Engineer Lehmann, always practical, spoke first. "We have two options as I see it. Continue to Argentina as planned, or surrender to the Allies." "Surrender means internment camps," countered Weber, "perhaps years before we see Germany again." "If we continue," replied Müller, "we become agents of a dead regime, carrying its secrets to those who would preserve its worst aspects." Klein, who had remained silent until now, finally spoke. "There is a third option. We deliver the submarine and ourselves to Argentina as ordered, but we control what happens to the cargo." All eyes turned to the young navigation officer. "Explain," prompted Müller. "We document everything," continued Klein, warming to his idea. "Create an inventory of exactly what we're carrying. The scientific and technical documents could benefit humanity if placed in the right hands. The financial instruments could help rebuild Germany. But anything connected to atrocities, medical experiments, racial pseudoscience, we destroy before arrival." Müller considered this proposal carefully. It represented a middle path, neither blind obedience nor outright mutiny. "It would require absolute secrecy," he said finally. "If certain crew members learned of our plan, they might oppose it violently." "Then we involve only those we trust completely," suggested Weber. "Begin the inventory immediately, but maintain the pretense that we're following orders exactly." Müller nodded slowly. "Very well. We proceed with Officer Klein's proposal, but understand this: what we're contemplating could be considered treason. If anyone wishes to withdraw, now is the time." No one moved. In the silence of the submarine's depths, 4 German naval officers had just committed to a course of action that would alter history in ways they could scarcely imagine. In the days that followed, Müller, Weber, Klein and Lehmann began their clandestine inventory, working during off-duty hours to catalogue the contents of the cargo compartment. What they discovered both confirmed and exceeded Müller's worst fears. Among the technical documents were detailed plans for advanced weapon systems, some theoretical, others partially developed. The financial assets included gold bars stamped with Reichsbank seals, likely looted from occupied territories, and Swiss bank account information totaling hundreds of millions of Reichsmarks. Most disturbing were the medical files. Though written in clinical language, they clearly documented experiments performed on concentration camp prisoners, procedures so horrific that Lehmann vomited after reading just a few pages. There were also artifacts that appeared to have been stolen from museums and private collections across Europe, many with Jewish ownership markings deliberately obscured. "This cannot reach Argentina intact," and declared Müller after they had completed approximately half their inventory. "The technical documents and financial records we can deliver. They might help rebuild a democratic Germany, but these medical files must be destroyed and the artifacts returned to their rightful owners if possible." As U-977 approached the Canary Islands, however, an unexpected development forced Müller to accelerate his plans. During a routine maintenance check, radioman Schmidt discovered Klein removing documents from a sealed container in the cargo hold. Though Klein attempted to explain it as a security inspection, Schmidt grew suspicious and reported the incident to First Officer Weber, unaware that Weber was part of Müller's conspiracy. Weber managed to deflect Schmidt's concerns temporarily, but it was clear their secret activities had been compromised. That evening, Müller called an emergency meeting in his quarters. "Schmidt knows something," said Weber without preamble. "He's loyal to the regime, decorated by Dönitz himself last year. If he connects the dots, then we must accelerate our timeline," replied Müller grimly. "Tonight we finish the inventory and separate what must be destroyed. We'll surface tomorrow night to dispose of it." "And Schmidt?" asked Lehmann. "I'll keep him occupied with radio monitoring duties," said Weber. "He's been trying to establish contact with other U-boats, despite our radio silence orders. I'll authorize limited transmission attempts under my supervision." The plan might have worked had Schmidt not been more observant than they anticipated. While ostensibly conducting radio operations under Weber's watchful eye, Schmidt noted the unusual activity in the cargo hold on the submarine's internal monitoring system. When Weber was briefly called away to address an engineering issue, Schmidt abandoned his post and made his way to the cargo compartment. There he discovered Müller and Klein sorting documents into two distinct piles. Even more damning, they were photographing certain papers with a small camera before placing them in what appeared to be a waterproof container marked for destruction. Schmidt retreated before being discovered, but his loyalty to the Reich overrode any personal regard for his captain. He sought out the 5 crew members he knew to be dedicated party members and shared his suspicions. By midnight, a small but determined faction had formed, committed to ensuring the mission's completion as originally ordered. The confrontation came at 0300 hours, as U-977 cruised at periscope depth off the West African coast. Schmidt and his supporters, armed with service pistols taken from the weapons locker, entered the captain's quarters, where Müller, Weber, Klein and Lehmann were finalizing their plans. "Herr Kapitän," announced Schmidt, his voice steady despite the gravity of his actions, "I am relieving you of command under Article 107 of the Naval Code, dereliction of duty in time of war." Müller rose slowly from his desk, careful to make no sudden movements. "Lower your weapons, Schmidt. This is mutiny." "It is you who are committing treason," countered Schmidt. "We know you plan to destroy cargo vital to the Reich's future. The war may be lost, but our duty remains." "The Reich is dead, Schmidt," replied Müller calmly. "Hitler is gone. Berlin has fallen. What we carry are not treasures but evidence of crimes that will haunt Germany for generations." For a moment, doubt flickered across Schmidt's features, but one of his supporters, gunner's mate Rudolf Hess, stepped forward. "The Führer entrusted us with this mission. We will complete it regardless of cost." What happened next occurred with such speed that later accounts from survivors would differ significantly. According to most versions, Lehmann lunged for Schmidt's weapon. A shot was fired, and Weber fell, clutching his chest. In the chaos that followed, Klein managed to draw his own sidearm, wounding Hess before being subdued by the other mutineers. Müller, seeing his officers fallen and the conspiracy undone, made a decision that would echo through history. "Enough!" he shouted, his voice cutting through the pandemonium. "No more German blood will be shed. I remain in command of this vessel, and we will complete our journey to Argentina. But hear me clearly. I will scuttle this boat with all hands before I allow these medical atrocities to reach shore." The standoff lasted several tense minutes before Schmidt finally lowered his weapon. "You will remain captain in name," he conceded, "but from now on every decision must be approved by me. The cargo remains untouched until we reach Argentina. Then history will judge who served Germany best." With Weber seriously wounded and Klein under guard, Müller found himself in command of a deeply divided submarine. Half the crew remained loyal to him personally, while the others, either through ideology or simple desire to survive, backed Schmidt's faction. For the next 6 weeks, U-97 continued its southward journey in an atmosphere of mutual suspicion and barely contained hostility. Weber's condition deteriorated despite Lehmann's best efforts at treatment. The bullet had punctured his lung and caused internal bleeding that the submarine's limited medical supplies could not address. 8 days after the confrontation, he died, and his body was committed to the deep in a solemn ceremony that temporarily united the fractured crew. As U-977 rounded the Cape of Good Hope and entered the South Atlantic, Schmidt's resolve began to waver. News transmitted from shore stations confirmed Germany's unconditional surrender on May 8, 1945. The Third Reich was officially no more, and technically, all German military personnel were required to surrender to Allied forces immediately. "We're fugitives now," Schmidt confessed to Müller during one of their tense meetings. "If captured, we'll likely face war crimes tribunals rather than simple prisoner-of-war camps." "Then our options are limited," replied Müller. "We can surrender to the Allies and take our chances, or continue to Argentina, where German expatriates might offer some protection." After consulting with his supporters, Schmidt made his decision. "We continue to Argentina, but with modifications to the plan. The cargo will be divided, some delivered as ordered, some kept aboard as insurance, and some—" He hesitated. "Some, perhaps, should never reach shore." Müller recognized this concession for what it was, an acknowledgement that at least some of the cargo was too morally compromising to preserve. "A reasonable compromise," he agreed, careful not to push too hard. "We'll need to surface soon to replenish our air supply and run the diesels. I suggest we use that opportunity to prepare the cargo for its various destinations." On April 17, 1945, after 66 days at sea, U-977 finally approached the coast of Argentina near Mar del Plata. Low on fuel, with diminished food supplies and a crew on edge, Müller ordered the submarine to surface approximately 15 kilometers offshore. There they encountered the fishing vessel Doña Maria, setting in motion the events that would lead to one of the war's most enduring mysteries. Captain Eduardo Vasquez watched with growing apprehension as a rubber dinghy was lowered from the U-boat. 3 German officers, led by a weathered man he would later learn was Korvettenkapitän Werner Müller, rowed toward the Doña Maria with deliberate strokes. "Permission to come aboard," called Müller in his accented Spanish as the dinghy bumped against the fishing boat's hull. Vasquez nodded wordlessly, and the German officers climbed onto the deck. Müller introduced himself with formal correctness, then made a request that Vasquez could scarcely believe. "Captain, I seek your assistance in contacting certain individuals in Mar del Plata, German expatriates who will arrange our discreet entry into Argentina. In return, I offer payment in gold." Vasquez studied the German officer carefully. Though clearly exhausted, Müller maintained a dignity and command presence that impressed the Argentine captain. "Why come to me? Why not simply enter the harbor?" "The war in Europe has ended," replied Müller frankly. "We are technically required to surrender to Allied forces, but we have reason to believe Argentina will offer us asylum." This much was true. Under Juan Perón's leadership, Argentina had maintained its neutrality throughout most of the war, only reluctantly declaring war on Germany in March 1945 under pressure from the United States. Even then, many in the Argentine government maintained pro-German sympathies and had already begun welcoming Nazi officials seeking to escape justice in Europe. "I cannot involve myself in politics," said Vasquez carefully, "but I know of the people you seek. For the right compensation, I can deliver a message." Müller reached inside his jacket and produced a small leather pouch. 5 gold coins, minted in Berlin, worth more than this boat and its cargo combined. There will be 5 more upon successful contact." Vasquez accepted the pouch. feeling the weight of the gold and the decision in his hand. "Give me the names. I will find them." As Müller provided the contact information for their Argentine collaborators, he was acutely aware that the fate of U-977's controversial cargo hung in the balance. Back on the submarine, Schmidt was preparing the most sensitive materials for transfer to shore, while Lehmann had rigged certain containers for rapid disposal at sea if necessary. Vasquez agreed to return to the same location in 24 hours with news. As the German officers returned to their submarine, the Argentine captain faced his own moral quandary. Should he report the U-boat's presence to authorities, contact the Americans who had naval vessels operating in the region, or honor his agreement with Müller? In the end, Vasquez chose a middle path. He would deliver Müller's message as promised, but he would also alert his cousin in the Argentine Navy, not as an official report, but as a family confidence that might eventually reach the right ears. Upon returning to Mar del Plata, Vasquez found the German contacts with surprising ease. They had been expecting U-977's arrival and had prepared arrangements for the crew's disembarkation and the cargo's secure transport. What Vasquez didn't know was that these same expatriates had already received 3 other German submarines in previous months, establishing an underground network that would ultimately help hundreds of Nazi officials escape justice. The following day, when Vasquez returned to the rendezvous point, he found U-977 in the same position, but with a notably more anxious crew visible on its deck. Müller greeted him with evident relief. "Your contacts await you at Puerto Quequén," Vasquez informed the German captain. "They've arranged for coastal patrol boats to be redirected tomorrow night, giving you a clear approach. They also send this as confirmation of their identity." Vasquez handed Müller a sealed envelope containing a single sheet of paper with a series of numbers and letters, a code that Müller immediately recognized as authentic. "You've done as promised, Captain. The remainder of your payment." As Müller handed over the second pouch of gold coins, a look of understanding passed between the two captains, men of the sea who recognized in each other a certain professional integrity, despite the circumstances that had brought them together. "May I ask what happens now?" ventured Vasquez. "To you and your men." Müller's expression remained carefully neutral. "We will surrender the submarine to Argentine authorities, claiming we refuse to accept Germany's defeat. The crew will likely be interned briefly before being quietly integrated into Argentine society. Many have skills that your country can use." "And the cargo?" pressed Vasquez, who had glimpsed crates being moved on the submarine's deck. "That," replied Müller with finality, "is no longer your concern." As the Doña Maria pulled away from the rendezvous point for the final time, Vasquez watched the German submarine growing smaller on the horizon. He would later learn that U-977 did indeed surrender to Argentine authorities on July 17, 1945, 3 months after the encounter he had just experienced. This discrepancy in dates would become one of many mysteries surrounding the submarine's journey. The official record would state that U-977 arrived with only essential equipment and personal effects. No special cargo, no gold, no mysterious documents or artifacts. Captain Müller and his crew would be briefly detained before most were allowed to settle in Argentina. Müller himself would later be extradited to the United States for questioning, but would reveal little about his submarine's activities during those missing months. As for the cargo that had divided the crew and nearly caused a bloody mutiny, its ultimate fate remained unknown. Rumors persisted for decades that medical files documenting Nazi atrocities had been buried in the Patagonian wilderness, that gold and financial instruments had funded a shadow network of former Reich officials, that technical documents had found their way to Argentina's nascent weapons programs. Perhaps most intriguing was the testimony of an elderly Argentine fisherman who, in 1978, claimed to have witnessed unusual activity off the coast near Necochea in May 1945. According to his account, a German submarine had rendezvoused with a nondescript cargo vessel flying no national flag. For several hours, crates and containers were transferred between the vessels before both disappeared into the night, the submarine heading south along the coast, the cargo ship east toward the open Atlantic. Whether this submarine was U-977 and what might have been transferred that night remains one of World War II's enduring enigmas, a final mission whose true purpose and outcome may never be fully known. And that concludes our story. If you made it this far, please share your thoughts in the comments. What part of this historical account surprised you most? Don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories from World War II. And check out the video on screen for another incredible tale from history. Until next time.